Did your parents let you speak your mind? My mother charged us money for every word we spoke, starting at a penny per word when I was 7 and raising her rates until we owed thousands of dollars we could never pay back. Mom bought a surveillance system that recorded every room in our house. She'd spend hours reviewing footage, tallying each word in her leather ledgers. Sunday was collection day when she'd present our bills. First week I owed $3 and paid with my piggy bank money. She said learning the value of words would make us better people. Dad left after a month of silence, unable to afford defending himself. She kept his final bill framed in the kitchen, $1,847 for the argument where he called her insane. The rates increased every year on our birthdays. 5 cents at age 8, a quarter at 10, a dollar at 13. My brother stopped talking entirely at 14 when his debt hit $4,000. He'd write notes, but Mom banned writing too, saying it was cheating her system. She hired her cousin as an enforcer who'd shadow us at school, documenting playground conversations and class presentations. Teachers got letters about not encouraging excessive speaking from her children. I tried different methods to manage the debt. First, I attempted sign language with my brother, but Mom learned it too and charged double for foreign languages. Then I saved birthday money to pay down what I owed, but she added interest that grew faster than I could save. I stole one of her ledgers once to destroy the evidence. She had backups and charged me a $1,000 tampering fee. By 16, I owed $12,000, and she'd started taking my entire paycheck from my part-time job. My school counselor noticed I'd gone nearly mute. I wrote her notes explaining everything. She called child services, but Mom had already filed paperwork claiming I had selective mutism from trauma. She showed them receipts for fake speech therapy, and my growing silence seemed to confirm her story. When the social worker left, Mom added a $5,000 fine for defamation through writing and banned me from using pencils. She got more creative with punishments when we couldn't pay. My brother had to stand in the corner for an hour per $100 owed. Then it became sleeping on the floor for days matching thousands owed. She'd make us eat only rice, 1 grain per dollar of debt forgiven. We got thinner as our debts grew larger. She installed locks on the fridge and bathroom that required payment to open. $2 to pee, 5 for a shower, 10 for anything from the kitchen. I got creative with silence, using gestures and faces to communicate with my brother and the few friends who understood. We developed elaborate charades for basic needs. But Mom started charging for expressive movement too. $20 for a nod, $50 for pointing, $100 for a thumbs up. She installed more cameras to catch every gesture. My brother started living like a statue, barely breathing to avoid charges. My coworker at the grocery store noticed I only spoke to customers in the shortest phrases possible. She found me crying in the break room after Mom sent a revised bill showing I owed $37,000. She offered her couch and helped me plan. We communicated only through written notes at work. I'd leave after my shift the day before my 18th birthday, when I could access my savings account. Mom found my packed bag under the bed. She'd installed weight sensors that alerted her phone when anything changed. That night at dinner, she announced new rates, $50 per word, retroactive to birth. She showed calculations proving I'd owed millions since speaking my first word. Her cousin stood behind my chair while she explained that leaving would violate our verbal contract from when I was 7. I broke 3 years of near silence. "This is insane," I said. 3 words. $150. Mom smiled and made a note. "You can't charge babies for talking," I continued. 7 more words. $350. My brother frantically shook his head, but years of silence had built up inside me. I told her exactly what I thought of her system, her bills, her twisted mind. Every word felt like freedom, even as I watched her tallying the cost. When I finally stopped, she calculated the total. $43,000 in new charges, she announced, plus the previous $37,000, $80,000 total. She opened a drawer full of tools I'd never seen before. Dental equipment, surgical instruments. "You know what's cheaper than charging per word?" she asked, picking up a scalpel. Not having the ability to speak at all, my brother suddenly stood and walked to the kitchen drawer. He pulled out a knife and held it to his own throat, gesturing frantically at Mom. His meaning was clear. Forgive the debt or watch him die. Mom barely glanced at him. "Go ahead," she said. "Your debt transfers to your sister. It's in the contract." He dropped the knife, tears streaming down his face. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Yes, I need you here tomorrow morning. Bring the surgical kit." She hung up and looked at me. "Dr. Baker owes me a substantial favor. We've discussed options for children who refuse to stop talking despite the financial burden they're placing on their family. Finally, I'm going to have some peace and quiet." I lunged across the table and grabbed the knife from my brother's shaking hand before throwing it into the sink with a loud clatter. The metal blade bounced off dirty dishes while I caught his eyes and mouthed the words, "Trust me," as clearly as I could manage. His face crumpled, but he nodded once while Mom watched us both with that same cold satisfaction spreading across her face. She was already pulling out her phone and scrolling through her contacts to find Dr. Baker's number. Her fingers moved fast across the screen while she kept one eye on us to make sure we didn't try anything else. I heard her press the call button and wait for him to pick up while my brother sank back into his chair looking completely defeated. Mom turned away from us slightly, and I caught pieces of her conversation about confirming tomorrow morning and making sure he brought everything they'd discussed. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stand and walk toward my room like nothing was wrong. Mom's cousin shifted to block the front door as I passed, and I knew he'd stay there all night if she told him to. Back in my room, I pressed my ear against the door and listened to Mom's footsteps heading to the kitchen. She was still on the phone, and her voice carried through the thin walls as she described exactly what she wanted done. My hands shook as I pulled out the old phone I'd hidden inside a ripped seam in my mattress months ago. The screen was cracked, but it still worked, and I held it up to the crack under my door to record her conversation. She was telling Dr. Baker about permanent damage to vocal cords and how it needed to look like an accident or medical complication. Her voice sounded happy for the first time in years as she discussed destroying my ability to speak forever. The recording picked up every word, including when she mentioned paying him $15,000 from my college fund that she'd been controlling. My stomach turned, but I kept recording until she finally hung up, and I heard her walking back toward the living room. I saved the file 3 times in different folders, then opened my messaging app where my coworker and I had been planning for weeks. We'd developed code words for different situations, and I typed out the one we'd agreed meant absolute emergency. Red alert tomorrow morning, need extraction. My finger hovered over the send button for just a second before pressing it. The message showed as delivered, and within 30 seconds I saw the typing bubbles appear. She responded that she'd be parked 2 blocks away at exactly 6 in the morning with her engine running and ready to go. I deleted the conversation and shoved the phone back into the mattress before moving to test my bedroom window. The frame looked normal, but when I pushed it up just a few inches, I saw the thin wire sensors Mom had installed along the track. They were connected to a small transmitter that would definitely alert her phone if the window opened more than 3 inches. I checked the door and found similar sensors there, plus a tiny camera I hadn't noticed before pointed at my bed. Mom had turned my room into a prison cell while I was at work, and now I understood why she seemed so confident about tomorrow. The house was completely quiet except for the sound of Mom watching her shows in the living room and my brother moving around in his room next door. I lay in bed fully dressed and watched the clock on my hidden phone counting down the hours until 4 in the morning. My heart pounded the entire time, but I forced myself to stay still in case Mom checked the camera feed. At exactly 4, I slipped out of bed and grabbed the wire coat hanger I'd hidden under my dresser earlier. The bathroom was across the hall, and I knew its motion sensor was super sensitive from all the times it had gone off accidentally. I slid the hanger under my door and started waving it back and forth in the hallway to trigger the bathroom sensor repeatedly. The beeping started immediately, and I heard Mom's bedroom door open as she stumbled out to check what was happening. The moment she passed my door heading to the bathroom, I grabbed the roll of clear tape from my desk drawer and carefully placed strips over the window sensors to hold them in place. Mom was cursing at the bathroom sensor, trying to figure out why it kept going off while I slowly raised my window all the way up. The tape held the sensors closed so they wouldn't trigger, and I grabbed my phone before climbing onto the sill. The drop to the bushes below was about 8 feet, and I tried to hang from the ledge to reduce the distance, but my sweaty hands slipped. I landed hard in the thorny bushes with a grunt that knocked the wind out of me. The mother's charging system starting at a penny per word makes me wonder if she truly believes this teaches value, or if there's something deeper driving this control. Her cousin enforcing at school and the detailed ledgers suggest this isn't about money at all, but something else entirely she's not admitting to herself. The neighbor's dog immediately started barking like crazy from their backyard, but I was already pushing myself up and running toward the street. My ankle hurt from the landing, but I forced myself to keep moving through the pain. Blood ran down my arms from the thorn scratches, but I didn't stop to check how bad they were. I made it to the corner just as headlights appeared from the direction of our house. Mom's cousin's car pulled up right where I was standing, and I saw him starting to open his door. But then my coworker's car came speeding around the corner from the opposite direction with the passenger door already hanging open. I dove inside while the car was still moving, and she hit the gas before I even got the door closed. Mom's cousin was still getting out of his car as we tore past him, going at least 50 in a residential zone. My coworker didn't slow down until we'd made 4 different turns and were completely out of the neighborhood. She pulled into her apartment complex and parked in a spot behind the dumpsters where her car couldn't be seen from the road. Inside her apartment, I finally lost it completely and started sobbing while she made me tea with shaking hands. She heated up some toast too, even though I couldn't eat it, and kept telling me I was safe now. She called the grocery store and told them we were both sick with food poisoning and wouldn't be in today or probably tomorrow either. Then she sat next to me on her couch and said we needed to go to the police as soon as possible. She'd already looked up the domestic violence hotline number and handed me her phone to make the call. The counselor who answered listened to me explain the situation, and then asked if I had any evidence. I played the recording of Mom discussing the procedure with Dr. Baker and heard the counselor take a sharp breath. She said this absolutely qualified as imminent danger of serious bodily harm and started giving us direct contacts for emergency legal aid. She also said we should go to a medical clinic right away to document any injuries or health issues from the abuse. My coworker drove us to the walk-in clinic near her apartment where the doctor spent over an hour examining me. She documented that I'd lost 23 pounds in the last year and showed signs of dehydration and malnutrition. She took photos of the red marks on my wrists from when Mom had zip-tied them after I couldn't pay the bathroom fee last month. The scratches from the bushes were cleaned and bandaged while she made notes about my ankle, which had swollen up pretty bad. She said my anxiety symptoms were severe and wrote down everything about the financial abuse system Mom had created. My coworker drove us straight to the police station after the clinic visit, and the waiting area was packed with people filing reports and arguing about parking tickets. I walked up to the front desk holding my phone with the recording ready, and when I played Mom's voice saying she wanted my vocal cords damaged permanently, the desk sergeant's face went from bored to shocked in about 2 seconds. He picked up his phone and called someone, then stood up and walked us past everyone waiting to a small room with a table and 4 chairs. Detective Isadora Hinton came in 5 minutes later carrying a yellow legal pad and a digital recorder, and she spent the next 3 hours asking me about everything from when the word charging started to how the locks on the bathroom worked. She wrote down every detail about the surveillance cameras, the leather ledgers Mom kept, how much each word cost at different ages, and the way Mom's cousin followed us to the school to count our conversations. I showed her photos on my phone of the ledgers I'd managed to snap before Mom caught me, and she kept shaking her head saying in 20 years of police work, she'd never heard of parents charging their kids money to speak. She asked for my coworker's contact info and called her right there in the interview room, putting her on speaker so she could confirm seeing me break down at work yesterday and how I barely spoke to customers. My coworker told her about finding me crying in the break room and how we'd been planning my escape for weeks using only written notes. Detective Hinton started filling out paperwork for an emergency protective order while explaining it would stop Mom from coming near me or contacting me until a judge could hear the full case. After we finished at the station, my coworker drove us to my brother's school because I needed to know he was okay. But when we got to the main office, the secretary said Mom had called him in sick that morning. My chest got tight and I could barely breathe thinking about him alone in that house with her after what I'd done by escaping. The secretary wouldn't give us any more information about whether he'd been to the school recently or if teachers had noticed anything wrong. We left the school and drove straight to the legal aid office where attorney Berenice Hinton was waiting for us, and she said right away she wasn't related to the detective, even though they had the same last name. She spread out blank forms across her desk and started writing fast while I explained everything again, drafting documents for a temporary restraining order and an emergency custody petition to get my brother out of that house. She said the recording of Mom planning the surgery was the strongest evidence she'd seen in a child abuse case, and we had a real chance of getting him removed immediately. While we sat in her office, my phone started buzzing nonstop with calls from Mom's number, and when I finally listened to one voicemail, she was screaming about me stealing myself from her and how I owed her $80,000 that she expected paid immediately. The attorney told me to save every single message, but not to answer or respond to anything because Mom might try to use my words against me in court. She downloaded all the voicemails to her computer as evidence and made backup copies on a flash drive she locked in her filing cabinet. When we got back to my coworker's apartment building that evening, the security guard at the front desk said he'd seen a man matching Mom's cousin's description, sitting in a car in the visitor parking lot for about an hour before driving away. My coworker called the police right away to file another report about harassment and stalking, and they said they'd send a patrol car to check the area every few hours. I stayed inside the apartment while my coworker went to get groceries and supplies since we didn't know if Mom's cousin was still watching the building. The next morning, 2 police officers went to our house to do a welfare check on my brother, but Mom answered the door with a stack of papers claiming she was homeschooling him now, and he didn't need to be in regular school. The officers couldn't go inside without a warrant, but their body cameras recorded clear footage of the locks on every single door in the hallway behind her, including what looked like a padlock on the bathroom. They came back to the station and told Detective Hinton what they'd seen, and she started working on getting a search warrant based on the visible evidence of imprisonment. I called my old school counselor who'd tried to help me before, and she agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the school where she gave me copies of all her documentation from when she'd reported Mom to CPS. She had detailed notes about how I'd gone from talking normally to barely speaking over the course of 2 years, plus copies of the letters Mom had sent demanding teachers not encourage excessive talking. The counselor was horrified when I told her how much worse everything got after her report, with Mom adding the $5,000 fine and banning me from using pencils or pens. She wrote a new statement right there in the coffee shop about what she'd witnessed and her concerns for my brother's safety. After that meeting, my coworker drove me to the bank where I'd had a joint account with Mom since I started working at 16. The bank manager pulled up 2 years of records showing Mom had been taking my entire paycheck through automatic transfers every 2 weeks, totaling over $12,000 in stolen wages. He printed out every statement and transaction record, highlighting the transfers that happened without my authorization, and said this was clear evidence of financial exploitation that could be used in both criminal and civil cases. The next day, Conrad Shepard from CPS called and asked me to come in for an interview about my brother's situation. I took the bus to the county office building where he met me in a small conference room with worn carpet and flickering lights. He had a thick folder already started with my name on the tab and started taking notes the second I sat down. I showed him photos on my phone of the locks, the ledgers I'd managed to photograph before leaving, and played him the audio of Mom talking about the surgery. His pen stopped moving when he heard her say she wanted my vocal cords damaged permanently. He asked me detailed questions for 2 hours about the payment system, the escalating rates, how long it had been going on. I explained about the rice counting, the bathroom locks, the sleeping on floors based on debt owed. He wrote down every single detail, shaking his head when I told him about mom charging my brother $100 per word now. He said in 20 years of working financial abuse cases, he'd never seen parents charge their own children for basic communication. Before I left, he made copies of all my evidence and said he'd be filing an emergency petition with the court. 2 days later, my attorney called saying the judge had reviewed everything and wanted to see us immediately. We rushed to the courthouse where Judge Harrison was waiting in his chambers with a stack of documents. He'd already signed a temporary restraining order that prohibited mom from coming within 500 feet of me or contacting me in any way. Talk about going from silent to having everyone's attention. This kid just became the star witness in what sounds like the world's weirdest crime documentary, complete with matching detective and lawyer names that aren't even related. He also added a special provision preventing any medical procedures on my brother while the investigation continued. The order would be served on mom within hours and would last 30 days until the full hearing. My attorney explained that violating it would mean immediate arrest and possible jail time. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in days, knowing there was legal protection in place. 3 days after that, I couldn't stand not knowing how my brother was doing, so I went to his school during lunch. I waited by the fence where we used to meet when I still went there and did our old signal, tapping 3 times on the metal post. He must have been watching for me because he appeared within minutes, thinner than before with dark circles under his eyes. He pointed to the nurse's office and I understood he wanted me to meet him there. The school nurse, Mrs. Fields, let us use her back room and didn't ask questions when my brother started writing instead of talking. His handwriting was shaky as he explained that mom had raised the rates to $100 per word after I'd escaped. He'd been sleeping on the basement floor for 6 nights straight because his debt was over $6,000 now. He lifted his shirt to show bruises on his ribs from the concrete floor, and Mrs. Fields gasped, immediately getting her camera. She documented every bruise, his weight loss of 15 pounds in 2 weeks, and the cuts on his feet from not being allowed to wear shoes as another punishment. My brother wrote that he was only eating dinner now because breakfast cost $50 and lunch was $75. Mrs. Fields called the principal while taking photos, and within an hour we had a full medical report documenting malnutrition and physical abuse. My attorney took the medical records that same afternoon and filed additional emergency motions with the court. She included Mrs. Fields' statement, the photos of my brother's injuries, and his written testimony about the $100 per word rate. The motion requested immediate removal from the home and placement in emergency foster care. She also filed charges of child endangerment and starvation with the district attorney's office. The next morning, a process server delivered a thick envelope to my coworker's apartment. Inside was a cease and desist letter from mom's lawyer claiming I was defaming her and violating our verbal contract from when I was 7. The letter demanded I stop all legal proceedings and pay the $80,000 I owed, plus another $20,000 in defamation damages. My attorney actually laughed when she read it, saying it was the most ridiculous legal threat she'd ever seen. She added it to our evidence file as proof of mom's delusions about the validity of charging children for speaking. That afternoon, Detective Hinton called with good news. Based on all the evidence we'd provided, especially the photos of locks on basic necessities and the audio recording of the surgery threat, she'd gotten a judge to sign a search warrant. She planned to execute it tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. with a full team. She wanted to catch mom off guard before she could destroy evidence or move the surveillance equipment. I went back to work that evening trying to distract myself but couldn't focus on stocking shelves. Mom's cousin showed up at the grocery store around 8 p.m. with more papers, walking straight toward me in the cereal aisle. My manager saw him first and immediately called security while stepping between us. The security guard escorted him out while he kept yelling about legal documents that needed to be served. The whole incident was caught on the store's cameras, and my manager wrote up an incident report for harassment. We added the security footage and report to the growing pile of documentation showing mom's continued attempts to intimidate me. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, tossing and turning on my coworker's couch thinking about what the police might find. My coworker stayed up with me, making tea and reminding me I was doing everything possible to save my brother. We watched old sitcoms with the volume low, neither of us really paying attention, just waiting for morning to come. At 6:15 a.m., Detective Hinton called to say they were inside the house. The search took 4 hours and revealed even more than we'd expected. They found surveillance equipment in every single room, including the bathrooms. Over 40 leather ledgers dating back 7 years with detailed tallies of every word we'd spoken. They discovered locks on every cabinet, drawer, and door in the house, each with a price list taped next to it. They also found contracts mom had tried to make us sign when we were children, including one from when I was 7 that she'd forged my signature on. The detective also found a box of medical supplies mom had been collecting, including local anesthetics and suture kits she'd ordered online. Within an hour of the search, Child Services arrived with paperwork to remove my brother from the house immediately. I rode with the social worker to the emergency placement center where they'd taken him, my hands shaking the whole way. The facility was a plain brick building with bright murals on the walls and security doors that buzzed when you entered. My brother sat in a small room with a teddy bear someone had given him, looking smaller than his 14 years. The social worker said I could have 15 minutes with him under supervision. He looked up when I walked in and opened his mouth, then closed it again like he'd forgotten how to make sounds. Then he stood up and hugged me harder than he ever had before, and the words started coming out of him in a rush. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," he kept saying over and over, his voice scratchy from years of not using it. The social worker had to gently separate us when time was up, and I could hear him still saying thank you as they led me back to the lobby. 2 hours later, Detective Hinton called to say they'd arrested Mom at her office where she worked as a bookkeeper. She'd tried to claim the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that she was teaching us financial responsibility, but the detective had the audio recording of her threatening to damage my vocal cords. They also arrested her cousin in the parking lot of his apartment complex. He didn't resist, but kept insisting he was just helping with childcare. The charges included child abuse, false imprisonment, and extortion for Mom, while her cousin got harassment and intimidation charges. The next morning was Mom's bail hearing at the courthouse downtown. I sat in the back row with my attorney while the prosecutor, a tall woman with gray hair pulled back tight, presented the evidence to the judge. She played the audio recording I'd taken of Mom discussing the surgery with Dr. Baker, and you could hear people in the courtroom gasp when Mom's voice said she wanted my vocal cords damaged permanently. The prosecutor showed photos of the locks on the bathroom and kitchen, the surveillance equipment, and the ledgers full of tallies. Mom's court-appointed lawyer argued she needed psychiatric evaluation, but the judge set bail at $200,000, saying she posed a clear danger to her children. Mom's face went white when she heard the amount. That same day, the medical board suspended Dr. Baker's license pending investigation. The news reported he'd been planning to perform an illegal procedure on a minor, and within hours his practice was shut down. When reporters tried to interview him outside his office, he claimed Mom had blackmailed him, but wouldn't say anything else without immunity from prosecution. His lawyer rushed him to a waiting car while photographers snapped pictures. By evening, the story had spread to local news stations. "Mother charged for charging children to speak," was the headline on Channel 7, with a reporter standing outside our house describing the word charging system. My attorney fielded dozens of calls from media outlets wanting interviews, but she told them all we needed privacy to heal. She set up a system where any reporter who contacted me directly would get a cease and desist letter. The next week, Child Services conducted deeper interviews with extended family and discovered Mom's father had done something similar to her as a child. He'd charged her for using electricity, making her pay for every light switch flip and outlet use. Mom's sister, who I'd never met, told the investigator that Mom had sworn she'd never do that to her own kids, but then she'd started the word charging system before I was even born. The investigator said this kind of abuse often runs in cycles through families. My brother got placed with foster parents named Graciela Knox and her husband, who lived in a yellow house with a big backyard 40 minutes away. They'd been fostering kids for 15 years and understood trauma from financial abuse. When I visited the first time, Graciela showed me my brother's room, which had posters on the walls and books on shelves and no cameras anywhere. She said they were encouraging him to talk as much as he wanted about anything at all. My brother was sitting at their kitchen table doing homework and actually humming to himself, something I'd never heard him do. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in financial abuse and coercive control twice a week. Her office had soft chairs and plants everywhere, and she never once looked at a clock during our sessions. She explained that charging children for basic needs like speaking was a severe form of psychological abuse designed to maintain complete control. She helped me understand that my voice wasn't something expensive or wasteful, but a basic human right that had been stolen from me. During one session, she had me practice saying random words just to hear myself speak without calculating costs. 3 weeks after the arrest, Mom posted bail using her house as collateral. Mom's lawyer demanding payment for a verbal contract made when the kid was 7 has got to be the wildest legal strategy I've seen. Imagine trying to enforce a bedtime promise to share Halloween candy in court. The protective order said she couldn't contact me or my brother or come within 500 feet of us, but within 48 hours she'd violated it by sending emails from multiple accounts. The emails demanded I drop the charges and pay back the money I owed her, with new invoices attached showing interest and penalties. My attorney forwarded everything to the prosecutor, and police arrested Mom again at a coffee shop where she was using the Wi-Fi to create more email accounts. At the prosecutor's office a week later, they offered Mom a plea deal. If she admitted guilt to the charges, she'd get 5 years in prison with possibility of parole in 3. Her lawyer, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit, strongly advised her to take it, explaining that if she went to trial and lost, she could get 15 years. But Mom refused, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was teaching us valuable lessons about the worth of words. The prosecutor sighed and said they'd see her at trial then. 2 weeks later, the victim services coordinator called me about compensation funds while I was stocking shelves at work. She explained the state had a program for therapy and medical costs for abuse victims. The application took 3 hours to fill out with all the documentation they needed. They wanted copies of the police reports, medical records, and receipts for any expenses I'd already paid. My coworker helped me organize everything into a folder. The approval letter came a month later for $2,000, which wasn't much, but it meant I could pay for my own therapy without feeling like a burden. My brother and I started having supervised visits twice a week at the family services building downtown. The first visit, we just sat there not knowing what to say without counting costs. The social worker suggested we talk about regular stuff like what we watched on TV. My brother told me about a cartoon he liked, and I talked about a movie I saw. We practiced having normal conversations about food we wanted to try to jokes we heard at the school. Each visit got a little easier, and we talked a little more. The detective called me one morning with news that made my stomach drop. She'd been going through Mom's financial records and found credit cards in my name I never knew about. 3 different cards with a total of $30,000 in debt. Mom had been using my social security number since I was 12. The detective said we were adding identity theft and fraud to the charges against her. She needed me to file reports with the credit card companies and sign affidavits saying I never opened those accounts. 3 months after I escaped through that bedroom window, I sat in a room with 23 people on the grand jury. The prosecutor had prepared me, but my hands still shook as I told them everything. I spoke in complete sentences about the years of silence and the ledgers and the locks on the bathroom. They asked questions about the surveillance cameras and the payment system. One juror wanted to know if I really had to pay to use the toilet. I told them about holding it for hours until I wet myself because I couldn't afford the $2. Another asked about the rice punishment, and I explained eating 1 grain per dollar of forgiven debt. The prosecutor showed them photos of the locks and the ledgers and played the audio of Mom planning to damage my vocal cords. After 2 hours of testimony, they voted to indict her on all charges. The judge set Mom's trial date for 6 months out at the next court hearing. Her new lawyer, the 4th one she'd hired, argued she needed psychological evaluation first. He claimed she had delusional disorder and didn't understand her actions were wrong. The prosecutor stood up and said Mom's detailed ledgers and careful planning showed she knew exactly what she was doing. The judge sided with the prosecutor but ordered a psych eval anyway. Mom sat there taking notes the whole time like she was tallying up words again. A month later, I moved into a small studio apartment with a girl from work who needed a roommate. The place was tiny and the kitchen barely fit 2 people, but it was mine. No cameras watching me, no sensors under the bed, no locks on the cabinets. I could open the fridge whenever I wanted and use the bathroom without paying. That first night, I turned on all the lights and opened every cabinet door just because I could. My roommate probably thought I was weird, but she didn't say anything. My brother started regular school again with special education support for his selective mutism recovery. The foster parents met with his teachers to explain his situation. They put together an IEP that let him write answers instead of speaking at first. His math teacher called him brilliant and said he solved problems faster than anyone in class. He still hesitated before talking and sometimes went quiet for hours, but he was getting better. The school counselor sent weekly reports saying he was making friends and even joined the chess club. Then Dad called my work one day after seeing the story on the news. His voice sounded older and tired when he said he was sorry for leaving us with her. He talked about the guilt he carried and how he should have fought harder. He offered to help with money or anything else we needed. I wasn't ready to forgive him for abandoning us, but I agreed to 1 phone call a week. He told me he'd been saving money to pay back child support he owed and wanted to put it toward our therapy. The forensic accountant the prosecutor hired spent weeks going through all of Mom's ledgers and receipts. She calculated every charge from when I was 7 until I escaped at 17. The total came to over $300,000 in speaking fees Mom had charged us. The number seemed impossible, but the accountant showed me the math. 10 years of daily charges adding up, plus interest and penalties Mom invented. My brother's debt was over $100,000 by itself. The accountant said she'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of investigating financial crimes. Mom's cousin got arrested again for violating his restraining order when he showed up at my apartment building. His lawyer contacted the prosecutor the next day about a plea deal. He agreed to testify against Mom in exchange for probation instead of jail time. He told them about the payment system Mom had for his enforcement services, $50 a day plus bonuses for detailed reports. He described following us to the school and recording our conversations at lunch. He admitted to intimidating our teachers when they tried to help us. He even had receipts Mom gave him for tax purposes showing she'd paid him over $40,000 to spy on her own children. The prosecutor took all this evidence and started building the case while I registered for community college classes that would start in the fall. I picked social work because I wanted to help kids like us who nobody believed. The registration lady at the college helped me fill out forms for financial aid and work-study programs. My first class was Introduction to Psychology, and the professor asked everyone to introduce themselves on the first day. I stood up and talked for 30 seconds about why I was there, my voice shaking but getting stronger with each word. Other students nodded when I mentioned surviving family trauma and wanting to help others. The professor encouraged everyone to speak up during discussions, and I forced myself to raise my hand at least once per class. My coworker drove me to campus 3 days a week, and I worked at the grocery store the other 4 days. Meanwhile, my brother's foster parents filed paperwork to become his permanent guardians after 3 months of him living with them. They brought him to visit me at my apartment, and he told me he wanted to stay with them. It hurt hearing him call them Mom and Dad already, but I saw how much weight he'd gained and how he smiled now. They had a big house with a pool and 2 dogs, and they let him talk as much as he wanted without keeping track. The foster mom showed me his report cards with straight A's and pictures from his birthday party with new friends. I signed the papers agreeing to the guardianship, even though my chest felt tight watching him build a new family without me. During the months before trial, the prosecutor's team dug deeper into Mom's history and found shocking stuff. She had contacted 7 different doctors before finding Dr. Baker, asking about procedures to damage vocal cords. 6 of them reported her to medical boards and police, but nothing ever happened because she used different names each time. One doctor kept recordings of her phone calls where she offered him $20,000 to perform the surgery. Another doctor had written to Child Services warning them about a mother trying to silence her children permanently. The prosecutor also found Mom's online purchases of medical equipment and books about vocal cord surgery. She'd been planning this for over a year, researching methods and buying tools piece by piece. The trial date finally came 6 months after my escape, and Mom had fired 3 different lawyers by then. She decided to represent herself, wearing a business suit and carrying boxes of her ledgers as evidence. The courtroom was small and quiet, with just a few reporters in the back row taking notes. Mom tried to question me during cross-examination, but the judge stopped her after 2 questions. He made her write her questions on paper and give them to the bailiff to read out loud. She wrote 20 pages of questions about why I was ungrateful and how much money she'd spent raising me. The prosecutor objected to most of them, and the judge agreed they weren't relevant to the criminal charges. I testified for 4 hours about the payment system, the locks, the surveillance, and the night she threatened surgery. My voice stayed steady even when Mom kept shaking her head and writing angry notes. Mom violated the protective order within 2 days by sending emails. That's an interesting choice for someone who charged for words. Now she's giving them away free to demand money back from her victims. My brother testified next, speaking in short sentences about sleeping on floors and eating rice grain by grain. The foster parents sat with him and held his hands while he talked about being scared to breathe too loud. Mom's cousin testified as part of his plea deal, explaining the whole spying system and showing his payment records. 3 of my old teachers testified about getting threatening letters and seeing us go silent over the years. The school counselor brought all her documentation about trying to help us and being blocked by Mom's lies. 2 of the doctors Mom had approached testified about her requests for illegal surgery and the money she offered. Dr. Baker took the stand in handcuffs, already under arrest for conspiracy charges. He admitted Mom had dirt on him about prescription fraud and threatened to report him unless he helped her. The forensic accountant presented huge charts showing the $300,000 in fake debt Mom created. She explained how Mom's system violated child labor laws, extortion statutes, and fraud regulations. A child psychologist testified about the severe trauma caused by financial abuse and forced silence. She said my brother and I showed signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder from years of systematic torture. After 3 days of testimony, the jury went to deliberate while we waited in the hallway. My brother sat next to me playing a game on his foster dad's phone, occasionally telling me about his high score. 2 hours later, the bailiff called us back in for the verdict. The jury foreman stood and read guilty on all 14 counts, including child abuse, false imprisonment, extortion, and conspiracy. Mom didn't react at all, just kept writing in her notebook like she was still tallying up our words. At sentencing 3 weeks later, I read my victim impact statement to a packed courtroom. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping, without counting, without worrying about the cost of my words. I described the childhood she stole, the voice she tried to take, the brother she traumatized, and the father she drove away. I talked about learning to speak again in college, about nightmares where I'm drowning in ledgers, about flinching when people ask me questions. I talked about my brother's recovery and his new family, and how we're learning to be siblings again. I talked about every grain of rice, every locked door, every silent dinner, every birthday that brought higher prices. The judge sentenced Mom to 8 years in state prison with mandatory psychological treatment. She stood up and gave a 10-minute speech about how she was preparing us for a harsh world where everything has value. She said we'd thank her someday for teaching us that words have consequences and silence has power. She said the real crime was raising ungrateful children who couldn't appreciate her innovative parenting methods. The bailiffs took her away, still talking about how the world would understand her genius eventually. My brother and I started family therapy together the next month, meeting every 2 weeks at an office near his school. The therapist helped us practice normal conversations about movies and music and food without the weight of survival hanging over us. My brother started making jokes, terrible puns that made me groan, but also made my heart feel lighter. He'd use 10 words when one would work, stretching out stories just because he could. A few months later, I got a letter saying I'd won a scholarship for survivors of family violence. The essay prompt had asked about overcoming challenges, and I'd written 5 pages without counting a single word. The scholarship covered my tuition and books, letting me quit one of my part-time jobs and focus on the school. Dr. Baker's medical board hearing happened around the same time, with prosecutors presenting evidence of his conspiracy with Mom. He lost his license permanently and got sentenced to 6 months in county jail for the conspiracy charge. He sent me an apology letter that I read once, something about making mistakes and hoping I could forgive him. I threw it in the trash and took out the garbage immediately, not wanting his words in my space. A year passed before I felt ready to help others the way my coworker had helped me. The domestic violence shelter downtown needed someone who understood financial abuse, and I applied without counting the words on my application. They hired me after hearing my story, and now I spend my days helping women fill out restraining orders and find safe housing. My voice stays steady when I tell them they deserve to speak freely, and some of them cry when they realize someone actually believes them. My brother sent me a video from his first debate competition where he argued for 20 minutes about education reform. Graciela filmed him pacing back and forth on stage using his hands to emphasize every point, while his opponent looked overwhelmed by the flood of words. He won that debate and the next 3, and his trophy shelf fills up faster than his foster parents can find space. The old house went into foreclosure 6 months after Mom went to prison since she couldn't pay the mortgage from her cell. I drove there the day of the auction and watched strangers carry out the surveillance cameras and monitors in boxes. One man held up a camera asking if anyone wanted it for $5, and I bought it just to take it home and smash it with a hammer during my next therapy session. The therapist said destroying it was healthy, and we spent the rest of the hour talking about reclaiming power through action. My coworker stayed close through everything and stood next to me as maid of honor when I married my partner 3 years after that night with the knife. She gave a toast saying she knew I was worth saving from that first silent shift when I could barely ask customers if they wanted paper or plastic. My brother stood up after her toast and talked for 10 full minutes about love and freedom and finding your voice. Nobody checked their watch or cleared their throat or told him to wrap it up because everyone could feel how much those words meant to him. I graduated with my social work degree the next spring and used my savings to start a nonprofit focused on coercive control cases. We specialize in the financial abuse that people don't always recognize as abuse because it doesn't leave bruises you can photograph. My team reviews cases where parents charge kids rent at age 10, or spouses control every penny, or elderly parents get their Social Security stolen by their children. We help them document everything and connect them with lawyers who understand that money can be a weapon. 5 years have passed since that night my brother held a knife to his throat, and now we meet for dinner every Sunday at a diner halfway between our apartments. We order too much food and talk about his college applications and my newest cases and stupid videos we saw online. Sometimes we talk about Mom and the letters she sends from prison that we don't open, and sometimes we just argue about whether pancakes are better than waffles. The waitress refills our coffee 3 times and we leave her a big tip because we can afford to be generous with money now. Last week he talked for an hour straight about his girlfriend, and I didn't tell him to hurry up or get to the point. Sometimes when I'm stressed about a deadline or a difficult case, I catch myself counting words in my head the way I used to. 5 words in that email means 25 cents at the old rate or $2.50 at the rate when I was 13. Then I shake my head and remember that my voice belongs to me now and nobody can put a price on it. I type the email without counting and hit send without calculating the bill, and get back to work helping someone else learn the same lesson. My office walls have thank you cards from clients who found their voices again, and pictures from my wedding where everyone is talking and laughing. My brother's graduation photo sits on my desk, and in it he's mid-sentence explaining something to the camera with his hands moving and his face animated. Mom's ledgers are evidence in a storage unit somewhere, and I hope they stay there forever gathering dust. The locks she installed got removed by the new owners who probably never knew why there were sensors on every door and window. Dr. Baker works at a hardware store now, according to someone who recognized him and told me they saw him mixing paint. I speak at survivor conferences sometimes and tell our story without rushing or counting or worrying about the cost. People ask how we survived and I tell them we almost didn't, but we found people who believed us. They ask if I forgive my mom and I tell them forgiveness isn't required for healing. They ask if the counting ever stops and I tell them it gets quieter over time until you barely notice it. My voice is mine and it's free and I use it every single day. Thanks for hanging out and wondering about all these questions with me today. It's always interesting seeing where curiosity takes us. Until next time. And hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.